Hi everyone, I'm Sharon Chinn and I wanted to welcome you to my project Strawberry Tulips. I got my reference photo from Unsplash and I did some edits in PixArt and came up with my final design. If you'd like to know more information about this process, let me know in the comments and I'll try to work up a video demonstrating it. I did my tracing using Procreate on my iPad. I'm painting the design today on a 9 by 12 acrylic or multimedia paper tablet. I've taped off an 8 by 8 inch block on the paper and sealed it with some multi-purpose sealer, then did 2 coats of white gesso. Sealing and gessoing the paper keeps it from absorbing the water out of your paint like a sponge and will keep the paper from rippling. Once it's dry, I'm toning the background with a burnt orange. This nice warm orange color will be a nice complement to the pink tulips. If you don't feel comfortable drawing your tulip design on the canvas or paper, you can transfer it with using the line drawing and graphite paper. I like to cut my borders off the design, close to the line drawing, which makes it easier for me to position it on the background. So I'm using a little paper cutter here to trim off the excess white borders. Then next you're going to lay your drawing in place on your background. Try to line it up straight. I use the edges of the tape as a guide. And you're going to just attach it in place with a couple little pieces of tape to hold it steady. Slip a piece of black or gray graphite paper between your drawing and the background. Just make sure that your graphite side is down. This piece I have is a little too small, so I'm going to have to work in sections. So I'll put it here towards the top, and then when I get further down on the design, I'll move it. But I'm using a light green sharpened colored pencil to go over my lines. The green or just any color of colored pencil will help you see what you've traced and what you haven't. So when I first start out, I like to kind of just pull my page back and make sure the lines are transferring, and then go on and finish transferring all the little lines of the design. So here I'm sliding it down so I can get the bottom of this design. So I did the top flower, and now I'm working on the bottom flower. And again, the green pencil lets me see what I've done so far, so I don't miss anything. If my pencil starts getting dull, I just resharpen it with an electric pencil sharpener. Keeping your pencil sharp helps keep your tracing lines more clear. Once you think you have everything done, just double check, and then you can remove your graphite paper and remove your traceable drawing. To make my tracing lines easier to see, I'm going to take a number 2 liner and some light violet or lavender color and paint over all of my tracing. This helps keep the drawing from smudging off the page as I'm painting, and just makes it a lot easier for me to use as a reference. You'll notice I'm fast forwarding the video through some of these portions that are very repetitive. So feel free, if you're painting along, to just pause it to give yourself time to catch up. So our canvas is all prepared. We've got our design trace down, and we're going to actually start painting now. I've put a little picture of the my reference photo here at the top left, so you can watch that as we go along. And we're going to start out by adding our darkest values. So when you look at the reference photo, look for the areas that are on the petals of the flowers that are the darkest. And so we're using a very dark, kind of a violet purple color, and I'm going to look at my reference and then try to duplicate by stroking those dark shadows in on my petals. As we work along, we'll have these darkest darks, and then we'll do a lighter dark and work up through the values in the colors. Value means the lightness or darkness of a color. So you can have two different hues or colors of paint, but they can be the same value. So you could have a blue that's a dark value, a violet or red that's a dark value. Um, you know, I very seldom use black in my paintings. I usually mix that from some of the other colors that I have on my palette. But in this case, I'm using the Deco Art Americana colors, and I think this color is Mulberry, which is a dark, dusty purple. So generally, we're going to work from the darkest up to the lightest values. And then once we get them all laid in, we'll go over go back over some of them because some of these colors are rather transparent, so it's hard to get good coverage with the first layer. But right now we're just trying to establish the darks and lights. So as I said, this first color is going to try to be our darkest darks on the petals. And I'm not including the stamens at this point. We're going to paint them later. We're just really working on the petals of the tulips. You know, this type of painting kind of requires you to pay very careful attention to your reference photo. You really want to see where each of these colors are laid down. So if you need to, you know, you can have your reference photo either printed out to use as a reference guide, or if you want to have it on your like an iPad or tablet. But sometimes if it's kind of a complicated design, I'll find that it helps me to put my finger on the reference photo at the spot where I'm wanting to add the color on my painted piece. So I can really pinpoint where my brush should go. So as I'm, you know, pausing here between laying the color down, it's because I'm referring back and forth to my reference, trying to see where I want this color at. Even though we're just using this one dark purple right now, you can see as I'm laying the color down, if I work right on the edge of my brush, it looks darker, but if I brush it out a little bit more, I can get just a slightly softer, lighter value of this color. That's kind of depends on how heavily I'm putting it down, but looking at it here, you almost can see like two values. We've got a lighter purple that's letting the orange background glow through, and then there's some that look darker where I've kind of worked more on the chisel edge of my brush. We're going to let a little bit of this orange background show through our whole painting. It kind of unifies the whole painting if you have these little bits and pieces of this orange peeking through. You can always, you know, you can even play with the color of your background, toning color, and it'll affect the overall look of your painting. With the pink, we could have chose something like a teal or a blue background. I'm sorry, background. Sometimes I like to use like a complementary color of what the majority of my painting is. I'm going to fast forward through the remainder of adding this dark purple value. If you're painting along, just pause as you need to. Here we're finishing up our darkest purples, and we're going to move on to a mid-dark value. For this color, I'm going to use some of our burnt orange. I think this is Canyon Orange in the Americana line, and I'm going to mix that with the purple. So we're going to have kind of a dirty reddish orange. And now I'm going to look for the areas of the flower petals that have a little bit more of a brownish shadow, kind of a brownish orange color, burnt sienna almost. And this will be a little lighter than the first colors that we added, or the first color that we added. This next color that we're using, this kind of burnt orange, burnt sienna type color, is kind of a subtle value change. As you're doing this style of painting, your eye does a lot of the blending. When you lay colors down that are kind of gradient values, your eye will fool you into blending them together. So that's what we're going to be achieving as we work through this, moving from the darker values up to the lighter values. When you stand back from the final painting, you won't see quite so much of the individual strokes, but you'll get the effect of a blended painting that goes from dark to light, and that's what gives you the three-dimensional quality of the flower. I've added a little bit of extender or blending medium on my palette. I just dip my brush into that before I load it with the paint. It just helps the paint to go on a little bit more softly or smoothly. Gives you a little extra time to soften the edges of your strokes if you want to. You just have to be careful when you're using it that you're sure to let it dry completely before you paint over top of it. So if you need to, you can speed up your drying with a hairdryer. You can usually tell if the paint's dry when it goes to a more matte finish. You don't see any shine left to it. At this point in the painting, I'm just trying to get my strokes laid down in kind of in the area that I think they need to be. It's a pretty ugly portion of the painting, but you just kind of want to lay it down and you don't want to keep noodling it too much. It will eventually get there. Again, we'll fast forward through the remainder of this mid-dark value. Pause as you need to, or you can just stop at the end of this section to see your painting versus mine. If you bought the pattern, I have step-by-step photos that you can refer to also. Okay, we're finishing up this mid-dark value. We're going on to what I call a mid-value 1. We're going to move into these pink colors. And the first one I'm using is a bright, kind of hot pink. It's Americana Strawberry. Just using it right out of the bottle, no mix, and just adding a little bit of the extender medium to the paint. I don't add it every time I brush into it because after I've dressed my brush a little bit, it's kind of worked itself into the puddle of paint, so we should be able to go along for a little while. So now I'm filling in where I see the brightest hot pink colors on the tulip petals. Red colors do tend to be very transparent, so as you're laying this down, you'll see that you'll see these dark colors right through it, even if you go over top of them a little bit. So don't worry about that. We're going to be adding multiple layers when we get to the final stages of the flower. So again, we're just laying these down and leaving them. You don't have to noodle too much. We're just trying to get the different values in where we see them on the reference photo. We're going to fast forward through this mid-value 1 section. Again, because it's quite repetitive, I'm just continuing to refer to the reference image and adding where I see these bright pinks. If you're painting along, pause the video or get to the end of this mid-value 1 section and you can compare my stopping point here with yours. Okay, here I'm at the end of adding my mid-value 1, this bright hot pink. Pause the video if you want to compare to your painting. We're going to add our next mid-value, which is a peachy pink color. And in this painting, I've used Vintage Pink by Americana. And we're looking for areas in the reference photo where the pinks have a warmer color. We'll be adding this warm pink, and then after we've got that down, we're going to move on to a cool pink. So look for the peachy tones in the reference photo. When you're working from a reference photo, it doesn't hurt to exaggerate the colors that you see. Sometimes this will make the final painting more interesting. The most important thing to hit is the value of a color versus the hue of the color. So again, value is the lightness or darkness, and hue is the native color of the paint, of that particular color. So it'd be a red or a blue or a green. Pinks are really more or less reds that have had white added to them. And in the case of this peachy pink, we're looking at a red that has maybe a little bit of yellow or orange added to it, since orange is a combination of red and yellow. We've finished up with our peachy pinks, and now we're going to go to a cool pink. I'm using Petal Pink by Americana, and this should just about finish filling in most of our flower. So again, looking at the reference photo, I'm just trying to identify where I see these brighter, cooler pinks and brushing them in. As you're laying down your strokes, kind of try to follow the direction of the petal that you see in the reference. This will be our, I guess, last mid value, and then after we get these in, we'll add some highlights. Okay, we're finishing up our last mid-value pink, which was the cool pink, and now we're going to start adding a couple light values. The first one we're going to add will be a mix of the petal pink that we just used plus some white. And, again, I'm using a little bit of that extender medium to make the paint flow onto the surface a little more smoothly and softly. So here you can see I'm trying to hit these bright light edges of the flower. You may also notice, as these layers have dried, acrylics tend to dry a little shade or two darker than what they are when you put them on wet. So these look really bright right now, but they'll tone down a little bit as they dry. You can see even where the cool pink, petal pink against the background and against the peachy vintage pink has toned down a lot. So you kind of take that into account as you're, brush mixing these values. You want to go a little lighter than what you think you really want because you know they're going to tone down when they dry. But we're going to add one more lighter value that's almost pure white on top of these, this light pink. As I'm pulling these lighter highlights in, I'm really trying to focus on where they're placed and also pulling them in the direction of the growth of the petal. That will help add form to the flower in addition to the value changes. We're finishing up this first light value, and next we'll move on to the highlights. Our highlight's going to be white, and I'm adding a little bit of extender into the paint. I do have, my brush is still dirty with that petal pink and white in it, so it's giving just a slight pink cast to this paint. We're going to put these highlights primarily on the edges of the petals. Here and there we might add a little bit more, but mostly it's going to be just these tips. And here we are finishing up our highlights. You can see on a few of these petals, I did pull the light down a little further. Now that we have all the petals pretty much filled in, I like to go in and add some background. We're going to put it in with some greens and kind of a dark green and a light yellow green and some of our purples. So I've put out some Thicket and Matcha Green by Americana. I've switched to a larger brush. This is probably a ½ inch, ¾ inch. And I'm just again looking at my reference photo and seeing where these blocks of color are. You want to leave a little bit of the orange background showing around the edges and here and there along the edges of the petals. But this is a pretty abstract background, just kind of a suggestion of green foliage and shadows. So I'm going to, again, fast forward so you can kind of see where I'm working and pause if you need to as you're working along. We've got our background placed in now, so you can see how the values of your flowers relate to it. We're going to go back and do some more details on the petals of the flowers and the centers. And then once that's done, if you want to adjust your background at all, you can go back and add some more darks or lights. We're going to work on the centers. Currently, they're just the burnt orange background that we had initially laid down on the surface, and I want to emphasize the golden colors in the center, so I'm using a yellow color, I think it's sunset gold, and adding a bit of white to it to lighten it up, and I'm going to go in and fill in here around the where the stamens of the flower are. And then I'm noticing there are some kind of golden highlights here and there on the petals, and I want to exaggerate those a little bit too. So I'll work this color here and there through the painting. Also, if I notice some of my original shadows, the dark purple color seems a bit too dark at this point, I can use this to help tone those shadows down a little bit. From this point on, we're just making adjustments. I want to paint in the stamens, and these are a dark blackish color, and rather than going to actual black paint, I'm going to just create a really dark color from the green and the dark green and the dark violet. This will help harmonize with the rest of the painting. So I'm just stroking these stamens in from drawing and just referring to my reference photo. Next, we're going to highlight the tops of these stamens with kind of a dirty white. Again, my brush, I'm not totally cleaning between colors. Start nudging my values now. When I look at the reference photo compared to my painting, I feel like I need some stronger values in the pinks. So I'm using alizarin crimson, which is a a little darker red than the strawberry, and adding a little bit of petal pink and white to soften that down. And I'm going to go in and brush over sort of a glaze over these areas where I'm seeing darker colors, darker pinks in the reference photo. Alizarin crimson's very transparent, so when I brush this over, if I have a little bit of the extender medium in my brush, it's just going to be like a transparent wash over what's underneath. Adding a little bit of white to it will give it a little bit more opacity and help me soften the transition between the values. As I'm doing this, I'm constantly looking between my reference photo and the painting. You can keep adjusting your colors. I'm adding a little bit of the sunset gold to the alizarin crimson to make it a little bit more rusty, and adding it here in some of these back shadows that have a little bit of a brown tinge to them. Then to start adding more intensity to the pinks, I'm going back to the strawberry, which is the bright hot pink. And I'm going to start working that in again into some of these bright pink areas that you see on the reference photo that I sort of lost as we added in our lighter values. Again, the reds tend to be pretty transparent, so when you stroke these over, what's underneath kind of glows through, so you're getting just a combination of all the colors that are on top of each other. So we'll be just noodling with colors now. I'm just going back and forth with the pinks, adding maybe some white or yellow to them, and just refining the colors, adding a little orange here and there, or a little yellow, just trying to replicate what I see in the reference photo. Your eye may see something different than mine, so that makes each painting individual. This little divot here is driving me crazy. My eye keeps going to it, so I'm going to try to correct that a little by lightening it up and making it not so contrasty with the area around it. You'll notice as I'm brush mixing these colors and holding my brush over towards the painting, what I'm doing is trying to judge what the value I've mixed compared to what's already on. Because if I want to lighten or darken an area, I need that mix to be different than what is currently down there. And again, remember your acrylics are going to dry a shade or two darker than what they are when they're wet. So constantly trying to do a hand-eye coordination thing, trying to get these values right. I always find it's good to set my painting at a different angle, walk away from it, and stand and look from a distance. Just put it in a different position helps you maybe see things from a different perspective. And again, I'm continuing to play with these colors and values until I get something that's pleasing to my eye. Sometimes it's even good to stop and come back to it the next day. Things will look different. I'm always doing little adjustments later. Here's my final painting. I've removed the tape, which gives it a much more finished look with the nice crisp white edges. I did noodle a little more and added some darker values of alizarin crimson to give more depth to the petals. And I played with the background a little more to add some darker values with ultramarine blue and added some yellows to the greens. I hope you enjoyed this project, and if you paint the tulips, I'd love to see your version. I invite you to share them on my Facebook page.